Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Dean's Fireside Chat happening here on LinkedIn Live. My name is Dr. Joe Dery. I'm the Dean and Vice President of Data Analytics, Computer Science, and Software Engineering here in the College of Information Technology at Western Governors University. And I'm coming from you from a cold and chilly Boston, Massachusetts this evening. I'm really excited about this episode beyond the buzzwords because it's really intended to take some of the things that we hear a lot about, AI, Gen AI, large language models, ML ops, analytics, data, all these different things that people get so excited about and start to ask the question, well, what do they actually mean when you want to implement and use them within a business context? Are some of these things really plug and chug? Or is there a little bit more that goes into it behind the scenes? And to help us start to think about that, I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Benjamin Perryman today. Ben is the Chief Data Scientist and also VP of Data Services at Multiplan. Ben has a pretty interesting background here too, spanning Multiplan itself, MetLife, SaaS. I definitely remember all my days playing in SaaS. I was a SaaS programmer when I first got into the data science world. So that brings back some really awesome memories. And the one thing I really appreciate about Ben is his no nonsense approach to providing unfiltered insights into the realities of analytics and really the art behind building scalable solutions that deliver business value. And one of the things we're really going to hit on tonight is what does it take to actually deliver that business value? Because just building an effective algorithm or having access to chat gpt and being able to write a particular prompt, it may not be enough in itself. And that's really what we want to unpack and demystify tonight. So Ben, welcome to the Fireside Chat. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So before we kick off with Ben, I just wanted to invite everyone today in the comments to be able to ask your questions too. We're going to be doing a live Q&A towards the end of the fireside chat, and we have a few folks that are going to be looking through those questions and interacting. So as we're going through, if there's something on your mind, please drop it in the chat. We'll get to it with Ben and myself a little bit later in the broadcast. So Ben, before we dive into some of the questions on beyond the buzzwords, there's a certain question that I love to ask everyone that comes into the Fireside Chat series. And that is what your definition of analytics is, what it means to you. And I think the thing for those that have maybe been watching some of these other episodes over the past year, every executive and subject matter expert that we've had on has had a slightly different take on what analytics is, which just makes this really exciting. So Ben, what does analytics mean to you?
Uh, uh, Analytics is insight generation, and it's the pursuit of knowledge, I guess. So, are you more talking about data analytics or analysis in general of the world?
It
Um,
can be whatever you want it to be.
well, that makes it easier to do an infinite thing. Analysis in general is just trying to understand things, and it's trying to create a level of demystification of what it is that you're experiencing. And so in data analytics, you're trying to demystify data, and that data, at least from a data science perspective, which is more like business science, tends to be about the businesses that you run. And so by demystifying a business, demystifying a process, you can then do it better. So that's what analytics is all about.
And I really appreciate that, and I think it plays well into beyond the buzzwords, because a lot of folks, especially if they're new to the domain or they're looking to break into data analytics, they tend to over calibrate to some of the technical aspects, really going deep into either the data storage techniques or the math or the programming. And then there's always this little business component that kind of sits on the side. But as you know, and I know, that business component is everything. It's the linchpin in actually being able to drive a lot of this business value. So I really appreciate that perspective there.
Well,
So
a data scientist, from what I've, there's always some quote, I forget exactly who it's from, but they always say that data science is 50% being a business consultant, like 30% being a computer scientist, and like 20% being a mathematician or somewhere around that category. But The mass of it has to be in business or whatever your pursuit is. If you're doing it in completely theoretical sense, you're going to miss the point more likely than not. So there has to be a marriage there with what reality is. That's what you're trying to figure out reality. So if you don't understand what the reality is, at least from a common sense perspective, you're going to build the wrong stuff.
So, with that in mind, and before we jump into some of these buzzwords, then, so as a chief data scientist and somebody who's been a hands on practitioner, maybe we could just start with the baseline of what a day in the life of a data scientist starts to look like. And then we can work our way towards okay, where do some of these exciting terms that we've been seeing all over LinkedIn and in blogs and podcasts and that our senior executives are looking for play into that? So, what's a basic life in the data scientist look like?
Sure. Well, there's different levels of data scientists and different engagement leaders. So maybe a day of the life of a project. I can give like percentages of a project and then say, if you're in that life cycle, you're in the whole life cycle. So some days you'll be doing some work and sometimes you'll be doing different things. But when you think about the entirety of the life cycle of a data science project, it kind of starts with some business problem. And when you think artificial intelligence, and I'm sure we'll get into that buzzword where computers can task, and you're trying to set up some intelligent system that's going to do some sort of task or inform some sort of really important decision. Uh, there's a lot of work in understanding the business and what will make it change. So you're asking questions about, hey, if you made this decision different, what would be the impact? Or if you're able to do this process more effectively, what would that mean to the bottom line or the top of the line? And from that, you can start to pick a project that you think is going to be valuable. You're doing exploratory data analysis in that space to say, is there really enough information here that I think I can find enough insight that I could really move the needle on that problem that's so valuable? And then you start getting into the weeds. If both those things are feasible and valuable, you're off to the races. And exploratory data analysis is absolutely critical. um, Being able to construct a data set in a deliberate manner so you can make a
Mhm.
representation of reality that is consistent with the problem that you're trying to solve is really important because that's kind of taking it from the real world into a math world. And you have to solve the math problem. And so some of it is about writing your own algorithms or running algorithms that pre-exist in some of the great packages that are out there to get to an answer, to get to a solution, and then you have to convert that back into a real world answer. You're still in this math world where probability is
Mhm.
0.54. Well, what the hell does that mean? You have to get it to a point that you can speak back to the business leaders, the people that own that decision, and discuss with them. Here's what the model is saying. Here's what we found out from our analysis, and have them believe in it because at the end of the day, they're the decision maker or their team is using that insight. If they can't believe that, they can't trust it. And if it's not trustworthy, it won't be utilized. Will be utilized inappropriately. And you don't want that. And so there's a level of understanding business problems, converting them into math problems, solving math problems, converting them into the business world, and then really convincing and being persuasive without losing objectivity to get people to understand why this will be valuable so they adopt it. Once you go to deployment, there's a monitoring that you have to set up so you can make sure that the model is performant. Things can change in the world, as they do. When that happens, your model may not be as effective. That insight may become less relevant. You need to be able to identify that quick. And then when you do identify it quickly, you need to rebuild your model or rebuild your insight if possible and shift with the environment so your model maintains relevance so that your solution, your insight maintains relevance so your company can keep on doing a good way. So that's a lot of different steps, but every one of them feels a little different. Some feels like business analysis and business consulting, building business arguments and business cases, absolutely required. Some of it looks like data engineering. Some of it looks like advanced machine learning modeling, statistics, mathematics, operations research, process development, intelligent systems engineering. Some of it looks like visualization and telling a story based on your results. And some of it looks like identifying anomalies and understanding the impact of those, being able to rebuild in a rapid way. So you're almost like a firefighter. And so there's all those different components, and it feels a little bit different every day, which makes the job exciting.
Oh, totally. I think the variety that you got any particular day is one of the exciting things. And I remember back to when I was a hands-on keyboard data scientist too, you never knew what the day was going to bring. And that was one of the things that you have to be comfortable with if you're going to go into this career profession anywhere in analytics. If you think that on Monday you're going to do X and on Tuesday you're going to do Y and on Wednesday you're going to do A, this probably be not be the profession that you were expecting, and you may want to think about some of the more traditional reporting or potentially finance type roles. But I guess the one thing that really came to mind when you were giving that description, and that was really thorough, and I appreciate it, is complexity. Right? It's not just about running a regression or gradient boosting or whatever it is. It's not just about a dashboard. You also mentioned this notion of decisions and business stakeholders and building trust. And there's a lot of storytelling that's going to end up coming with this too. So I want to take that and transition to some of the initial buzzwords we're going to talk about.
Sure.
So, ChatGPT. Some people have said that this and other generative AI and large language models could potentially replace the work that some folks are doing within a company. Everyone's excited to be able to deploy it and deploy it quickly. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is that even practical, especially given the complexity of the day in the life of a data scientist that you just explained? Is ChatGPT really the silver bullet that somehow simplifies that?
Um, Maybe for some things. Uh, I what I will say about ChatGPT, and it's an impressive technology,
Hmm.
um, is that it does reduce the barrier to trying to get to automated insight engines, right? And that's a real problem. It's one of the biggest things that has been pursued in the past 70 years has been trying to get to this place that the ambiguity that is in our language can be to some extent understood. And it was starting off with bag of words and everything else, and then started progressing, and then we started getting into LSTMs, and then we started getting deeper into that, and then
Hmm.
we progressed, right? And it went from 100 parameter, 200 parameter, 500 parameter, 1,000, and now we're at a trillion parameter model. And now we're just starting to get to the point that it's getting pretty good, right? But that's been a massive undertaking. So the ability to have a conversation with a computer that doesn't involve a very explicit, discrete language with a bunch of keywords is enthralling. Is very exciting. What I will say is that the models that they trained on it and the purpose of it and the way that they went about basically building these recurrent neural networks that then predict net sport and things of that sort, um, it, it creates a sort of parroting system in some ways against a body of literature and or a corpus, and that you could call it a parrot. I think that right now those systems are very good at imitation, and innovation is not currently what it's good at. So if you're looking for summarization and meeting summarization, mean notes, if you have a corpus of documents for like HR
Hmm.
that are vetted and it's a small corpus, that's a really good use case. There's some stuff that's starting to come out where they're addressing the major concerns of Gen AI. Things like we need to understand what source you use, so that people could vet the source. That there's a search that fee search or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called. That starts to give you sourcing, so you can ask a question, you get an answer, but you also get the source of the answer. There's a paper out by Google recently that was talking about confidence scores in the answers and being able to start to create confidence scores. So they're trying to address some of the major issues, which is we don't know if it's accurate or not. Um, so I don't think it's there yet. I don't think it's going to replace a data scientist yet. I think it's good at some problems and some tasks, just like different types of AI are good at automating different tasks. I do think it's a really the chat interface is particularly compelling, and as the next generation, since really back in what the 80s, 90s when we got keyboards and mouse and screen that I'm talking into right now. That's we went from punch cards where we had no and printed out results into our modern day interaction, which is keyboard, mouse, screen, and now it's conversation, and that's powerful. So that's I really like that part of the technology.
In hearing you talk about it, a lot of it is user experience in a lot of ways, whether that's the data scientists themselves or a business user, and trying to make knowledge more accessible. One of the things I know in my past life with the deployment of any algorithm was the explainability aspect of it and trying to gain that trust. And you could take an approach where you start off with a less accurate model that's more explainable and gain that trust and work your way through, and then eventually flip it out into something that's more accurate, has that higher precision, but is more of a black box. And I think there's a lot of us that are hoping that this may be a way to go a step further with stakeholders, where when they see that particular prediction or an estimate, that there is some kind of a plain English explanation that may actually start to come with it. But I guess what I'm curious though is you also talked about the need to find business needs and work with stakeholders as well too. So where do you where would you deploy ChatGPT in this process? Do you see it as being more at the end of the data science lifecycle, at the beginning within data management somewhere else, or does it have different places?
I think it has a number of different places. The a lot of chat GPT stuff is off of corpus of text, right?
Hmm.
And so if you were to build something like a internal business knowledge base using the corpus of text of like process documents and explanations of business flow and top grievances by that are coming in through customer service and saying summarize the top 10 reasons people are mad at us today, right? And having that sort of corpus to be able to review is good at those, and that generates general information that's super powerful, right?
Hmm.
So I think at the beginning stages of trying to learn about a business very rapidly, because you have to kind of dive into the deep end, it could help with that learning. I think that it's not really there yet. There are some companies that are starting to look at some numerical analysis and having a level of like generalized discussion of analysis about the underlying data. That's a little bit of a hard problem to do well. But there are some groups out there that are trying that. And so maybe exploratory data analysis is on the horizon as being something that can be generative AI enabled, but that's still in the research phase. I do think that being able to present results back or have a set of explanations back and potentially having that sort of conversation about the model through an interface has potential. Um, it's but it's only as good as the underlying corpus of data, right?
Hmm.
So if you're only able to kick out a highly technical set of documents or the variable names make no sense or things of that sort, you're going to probably not have the required components to make that sort of system really effective for you. Um, but I could be wrong. I mean, they're expanding every day.
So I'd love to dive in for a second to the data piece that you were just talking about. So I was on a podcast recently where I was reflecting on the last 35 years of data management strategies and data infrastructure and how things have kind of evolved from the early 90s to what we're seeing today. And, I remember when I spent most of my time as a hands on keyboard data scientist, it was right kind of at the end of the kind of the SQL craze and your traditional relational databases. And there was the rise of the data lake at that point. And unfortunately, over the years, those things became data swamps in a lot of ways because they were dumping grounds. And as a data scientist, it was definitely like looking at a needle in a haystack in a lot of ways. And now we see a new rise of the data lakehouse. So bringing some of the foundational data management principles back in, along with the flexibility of the actual data lake itself, in separating those with a semantic layer.
Hmm.
And it's making me think: is ChatGPT and these types of models, because of the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon, going to push us even further into those foundational data management practices? And do you think we're going to see a resurgence in that?
I think the resurgence is already happening. Um, so actually, I just took a course over holiday break on data-centric artificial intelligence, which is given by MIT. It's free. It's look around online and can get it. You have your own course materials. I probably shouldn't say that. Go to the WGU courses on data-centric AI. They're such a good.
It's all good.
Um, no, but one of the things that they brought up, and this is true, really when GPUs came around in the 2000s, there was this kind of split that occurred between the machine learning focused algorithmists that were saying we finally have enough computational power to try out all of our stuff. And there's this big push just from a pure modeling perspective to get better models. And a lot of innovation has occurred there over the last 20 years. And that's when you got into a lot of Kaggle competitions that don't tell us about the
Mhm.
data, just try to find patterns and that sort of thing. And then the traditionalists that were more around we need to get data into a good quality, we need to get it representative, we need to try to take out the noise and be effective with it, we need to understand the business concepts and stuff like that in more of the traditionalist route. And I think that we've gotten to a really good extent in modeling. And as we've started to commoditize more and more models and make them more accessible, the real question becomes how do you design data better and how do you get to a place that you can very rapidly get into a representative data structure. And that course I was mentioning was talking about systemic ways to work on your data quality. um, I was just today sitting down and I was asking one of my data scientists how they were doing, and they said doing well, but I'm seeing something weird in the data. And we sat down and we talked about it for a few minutes, and we both agreed that was weird and not something that would be representative for the real world. And I said, okay, well, build an exception table, give the sizing of it. Let's sit down with the business. Let's sit down with people that own the data, and let's see if we can get it a little bit cleaner. If you can't actively prune and actively clean your data and get to a better place with your data, then you're right, garbage in, garbage out. And so you're seeing more. One of the things I was advocating for was data meshes when you have large
Mhm.
companies have many different companies or many different sub companies or maybe silos, is to push the requirements for cleanup down at the individual source levels to create curated copies that then interact well with each other. And that allows you to have this highly representative clean data set that allows these algorithms to learn faster. And machine learning, which we'll demystify that term in a second, I imagine, but um, more and more is about, okay, how do I build a curriculum to give to this algorithm so it learns appropriately? If you think about that as how you develop data, as I'm developing a curriculum for this pattern recognizing learner, that is the algorithm, and my job is to create that to begin with, it becomes a very interesting, different problem to solve. And I think that's ultimately where
Mhm.
the industry is going to go to some extent, is being able to better curate and create representative spaces of what you're trying to solve for, which you can't do if you don't know the problem that you're trying to solve.
There's so many gold nuggets that I can extract from that, and the one that's kind of sitting in my head a little bit is the way that you just talked about data and the way that those data models are really starting to evolve. And you mentioned data mesh as well too. So for those that are listening right now that aren't really familiar with the data mesh model, it's really built upon this concept that your business units or particular domains of expertise really manage that particular aspect of the data, that data set, and everything feeds back. So to the point you were making, Ben, it's all about kind of pushing ownership and accountability back into the hands of the business owners, the SMEs, the domain experts, et cetera, versus trying to centralize it. Um, Interesting. Interesting. So we talked about the business complexity of knowing where. We talked about the dependencies on, on language and the evolutions that we're seeing. We talked about the data aspects that are going into this that are creating some of the hallucinations that we may hear about, or the lack of trust that maybe we see with some of these models. I want to talk about one more thing before we jump over to machine learning, though, which is prompt. So when you
Prompt
open up
engineering,
chat, sorry, say it again.
like prompt engineering.
Exactly. So when you go into Chat GPT today, and anyone who's watching may have gone in and created a free account and tried this out, you're given an open text box to be able to give some kind of an instruction or a command. And some people may treat that a little bit like Google search, but it's not really Google search in the way that it's set up. How do you think about prompt engineering and the best ways to interact with these kind of technologies, and what are you maybe doing internal to your team right now to try to build out some of those practices around how do you effectively give the machine the command?
That's yeah. So that's a good question. Um, think about prompt less as a question, more like a command.
Hmm.
Um, and really, when they were going through iterations of this and starting to do reinforcement and trying to build out the chat layer, they were really looking at how do I address major questions, how do I create voice and a structure to a voice um, that is consistent with like common categories and common ideas. So uh, explain quantum physics to me like I'm a fifth grader, or like a fifth grader. Um, that's giving some a command, explain quantum physics. It's giving a topic, and it's giving a framework with how to explain it, and that allows them to adjust their language essentially for that. I mean, you can use it to some effect with Google like querying, but
Hmm.
alongside prompt engineering is a level of fine tuning, right? It's going to follow up on your conversation. So if you can understand how to most effectively work within that system because it's been pre-trained, you're going to get better responses. There's a large, there's a growing set of like Reddit uh, cool guides about prompts and like, hey, here's the first part of what you say, here's the second part of what you say, here's the third part of what you say. Almost like a coding language, right? Surprisingly structured in that way. And while you don't have to do that, being giving that level of structure to how you converse can increase the likelihood that you're going to get back a good response. So what you say and how you say it matters, and also what you're looking at matters. So if you're looking at something that is has a large corpus of material on the internet historically, you're going to probably get a pretty good response, especially if there's not super
Hmm.
divisive opinions about the topic. If it's, explain what logistic regression is. Okay, there's probably 12,000 different sources that explained logistic regression. A lot of those probably self reference each other and steal each other's wording. And so when it tries to generate off of the prompt of explain logistic regression, it has a large corpus that's highly consistent. And so the likelihood of
Hmm.
there being hallucination is very low because it's all saying basically the same thing. When you're using a word that has only been heard of once on the internet, if at all, what's going to go find something similar to it? And who knows what that is? And so that's one of the reasons that the Google paper is particularly interesting that came out a couple weeks ago is it might be able to tell us the answer of I'm not really confident about this. I should probably not give you a good response.
It's making me think in some way about with Wikipedia and the rise of Wikipedia and people using it as a source of truth and citing it in papers and other things before they fully realized what it was, which was a community-based document. My cousin at one point actually went into his hometown's page in Wikipedia and edited it and said that he was the mayor of that particular town.
Yeah.
And for the whole world to see, he was the mayor of that town, even though he was not the mayor of that town. He was under 18 at the time. And I think remembering that unless you have that large corpus with a lot of consistency, to your point, that there is potential to have hallucinations or just blatant inaccuracies. And that's one thing that we got to keep in mind. So everything around prompt engineering and knowing how to engage with these technologies for a data scientist makes sense, right? There's algorithmic thinking is part of the skill set that you learn. You're usually used to using Dr. Google and other searches to be able to learn things. You can go on Stack Overflow. You can check out GitHub. You can check out individual wikis, Slack channels. But for a business user that isn't necessarily in that domain often and doesn't know how to fish in that domain, is it fair to assume that they're going to effectively be able to use prompt given everything that you just talked about?
Uh, no. Well, no.
Maybe.
I well, caveat is I think there's a lot of work on building wrappers,
Hmm.
further wrappers around ChatGPT. And you can build a restrictive space in which maybe there's less questions that you know are going to be more effectively answered or things of that sort. We're running some POCs right now on trying to help out people with coding, try to get improvements in quality. And that's not people that know AI. That's people that are coders and they've been Java or whatever or using at the time. Um, so that's encouraging, but very much so
Hmm.
right now we're at that stage of don't trust, verify. Like if it's going to write you a piece of code, check through the code, make sure it made sense. Okay, it might save you some time in writing everything out, and then you're going to go through a peer review process for what is generated and make a lot of changes because there might be a lot of errors, especially if it's a novel topic that you're trying to code. If it's a basic topic you're kind of trying to code, like print out "Hello World" or something like that, it'll probably get that right. And so it changes the type of work that you do. But it's still very much so in the don't trust, verify. And that when it came out, Sam Altman on the website when he was putting out for beta release said, "Don't use this for decisions that matter." That was the closest thing to true responsible AI delivery of a product that I've seen in the market in a while. And I was like, okay, at least he's telling people, listen, don't make major life decisions off this necessarily. So that's really encouraging. Responsible AI is a very important part now that we have things that don't have to be 100% accurate.
So do you think this whole domain around using prompt could potentially be the next version of data literacy or data fluency?
I
Maybe
think so.
prompt fluency.
Prompt fluency. I think AI fluency is starting to become a really big thing, right? And I think that when you look at like EU AI law that's coming out in May, I think it's when it's going to be enacted or when the final release will be. When you look at Biden's executive order from October, it's all about we have to get better about literacy to really understand the capabilities and limitations of these technologies, as well as to understand the risk. One of the problems that you run into with ChatGPT and some of these other systems is that it's a completely different threat vector to attack. You can attack via prompt. And it's so hard when there's the complexity, nuance, infinite possibilities of the English language or whatever
Hmm.
language you're speaking in to attack this thing and give it different angles. And so you get to be, it's much easier for a hacker to be creative and or to create a false reality or things of that sort. So um, we have to become more literate as a society as this becomes more pervasive in it. And I think that right now we're at that inflection point, which feels like chaos or feels like people are getting way behind. It's because of the speed of innovation that's occurring right now and the need for the every person to catch up and really understand what AI is and demystify it.
That's a great point, and I was immediately thinking there's some real implications here for cyber security education as well too, with that whole new avenue on how you can potentially manipulate and nudge through a generative AI approach. Um, the last thing I think I want to mention on this before we switch topics then is I've heard from a lot of folks, and myself included, that ChatGPT may sit on the Gartner hype cycle and maybe very top to that peak of excitement. Do you think that it's going to drop off as folks start to think about the realism around how do you implement this? How do you do it at scale? How do you containerize it? How do you think about the security? So the cybersecurity implications. the data processing that's required behind it. Are we in for a little bit of a roller coaster ride there?
Uh, I would say about the same as every other technology since the beginning of time. Um, the potential is very large for it.
Right.
And just like when blockchain came out, it was like, this is world changing and we don't need banks anymore. And we have all this distributed ledger stuff. And if you take a theoretical idea and you hype cycle it, or if you take a level of application, you hype cycle it, you're right. The moon's the limit, right? We are in a hype cycle. We are in a hype cycle that's heavily marketed, which can make data scientists' jobs tough. We're going to hit a level of reality, but that there's a little bit of a disillusionment cycle because they've sold it beyond what its current capabilities are, and really what its current capabilities are might be in 2 years,
Hmm.
3 years. So people are willing to work through innovation for a while. But if your hype cycle is too high, then it doesn't hit in 3 years and then people lose interest. And that's when you get that trough of disillusionment or whatever it is. And then it levels off. But that level off is going to be a better place than where we were before. Um, so, from a strategy perspective, some people are saying, well, I know the trough is coming. Let me hold off and let the technology become field tested by the early pioneers.
Hmm.
And then once it's field tested and gets a little bit more solidified, let me adopt because I won't have to go through that chaotic journey, right? Some people are about, well, if I can get in the door a day earlier, that's great. And there are some people that are saying um, regulation has to catch up. So in general, IT risk and security people are pretty nervous about it, especially if there's an external facing edge to the technology. Internal purposes seems a little bit safer. Um, and from a like accuracy perspective and data science perspective, there's some concern there too, right? And the initial POCs that people have been doing where they've been trying to solve beyond just document summarization is something that's like a little bit more informative, a little bit more insightful. You're getting like 75, 80% accuracy
Hmm.
rates, 70% accuracy rates after tuning. And so depending on the problem, it may be that it's just not solvable at the 90+% level that you can start to trust it implicitly. And that's always the promise is how can we automate something completely, or can automate something to such an extent that we can cut our staff down by a large amount because we've automated this task that has been so manual in the past. If it's still the verify, don't trust, then it's a augmentation to people's work, not necessarily a reduction in staff. And so that promise that traditionally people have been thinking about with respect to AI and automation isn't there yet.
Hmm. I think the other thing that comes to my mind too is just around the change management that's going to be needed to really use this technology at scale within a business setting. And I can remember back to projects I worked on where I had an accurate model. I could prove it was accurate. The stakeholders agreed with me that it was accurate, and they still didn't want to use it. Right. And
Yep.
it really came down to the way people work and the ability to also have the human in the loop component with gut instinct and experience, and that human experience that really comes with it. And if we can start, hitting the brakes a little bit and thinking about, okay, well, in a world where you go through the trough and you end up at a plateau, and a lot of the kinks have worked out, so you have the secure environments, you have the cybersecurity in place, you have the right data infrastructure underneath, you've thought about your foundational data management, your data science teams have really figured out where this is going to sit in business processes. Then you could start to ask yourself, okay, well, what does this mean for employees? What does this mean on their day-to-day role? What proportion of their time are they doing what? How are you going to step into this with potentially transitional practices? And then if you start thinking about that now, hopefully by the time we get to that plateau, you'll be able to do things a lot more effectively and actually be able to see that ROI.
I think that's an astute observation. I believe that that's quite possible too. Planning ahead and thinking about what is the future.
Across everything.
could the future world look like in a reasonable sense? Take your height optimization or optimistic eyes and just drop them down to 50% and say, what does 50% look like? Um, it can be an effective way to plan, strategize, and build up the infrastructure or expectations that you need to actually do that change management or that culture management and cultural change that allows that technology to enable increased productivity. And to your point, many projects I've seen where the the data scientist is right, the model's good. It, if implemented, would make millions of dollars, and then it doesn't because people don't trust it, um, or they don't have an inclination or incentive to use it. Um, and those things can really hinder the success of a project. Things that you should be asking when you go into a project to make sure that the work you're doing is going to be effective or it has a snowball's chance in hell of working if you do make something that's really powerful. So it's part of that business acumen that you really need to have as a data scientist.
At the very beginning of our conversation tonight, you mentioned the word decision and
Mhm.
decision making. And I think that's what it's really playing to, right? If we lived in a world where every business person was a rational actor, our data science jobs would be a lot easier in some cases, right? But
Sure.
the reality is that we all have biases, there's heuristics that are in play, there's emotions, there's beliefs, and there is the human experience aspect. And I think there's a real opportunity now for everyone to step back and think about how that plays into this and how these technologies exist within the greater decision making ecosystem. So Ben, just transitioning to one last topic before we go to Q&A, I do want to hit on machine learning, ML, and maybe ML ops a little bit too. In addition to Gen AI, large language model, you have the AI term, you have ML, ML ops. I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of folks using these things interchangeably in the last year. Now,
Sure.
granted, I'm excited that folks are talking about all things that are analytics. That's really exciting. And, we can thank OpenAI for putting that out there free for people to get really excited about. But how does ML, for example, differ from everything else that's here?
Sure. Okay, I'll do with the big bots first. AI, right? Automating tasks that with computers that humans would normally do. That's what AI means. It's meant that since the 1950s, 1960s, when the term was coined. Back then, it meant business rules. It meant like if then else logic. It meant simple computation. Calculators at NASA used to be people, not a computer. And so that was AI, was doing 2 plus 2
Mhm.
to some level. It was replacing that task work from a human. So uh, fast forwarding through 70 years with such a general term, it means something in every generation. And as we get large technological advances, it means different things. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, it started becoming machine learning. Machine learning is AI, it's automating a task which is around the analysis and prediction of some phenomenon through data. But the advantage to machine learning is that it's without explicit instruction. So you go from an explicit world, which is, hey, here's a business, if then else logic, and you have to hard code the writing and everything else, into here's a set of data, figure it out. Tell me what's interesting, predict the future. Go, computer, go do. And so it's without that explicit capability. And we're using statistics and we're using mathematical concepts to be able to churn through that data and generate patterns and generate insights, right? And so that's being done in an automated fashion. And then, really, to some extent, there was a big spike in AI in 2004 or 2000 when GPUs came out. Kind of died down. ML started becoming a really popular term. I'm using Google Trends as my thought process for this. I had to do a presentation a couple weeks ago. In about 2010, 2015, it started ramping up with machine learning. At the same time, it was ramping up with respect to deep learning, which is using neural networks that have hidden layers. And that's what a deep learning system is. So we had that kind of hype cycle where deep learning is just a machine learning model. It's learning without explicit instructions. And now we're hitting this Gen AI curve. So machine learning, part of AI, specifically focused on using statistic and mathematical techniques to be able to generate insight from data without explicit instruction. And then ML ops and operations is being able to operate and maintain the models that are deployed. And that's much more of a monitoring and environment uh, uh, analysis mode. And so you built this model and you've created this view of the world. That's useful, that's insightful. ML operations is deploying that into your decision making process, but then saying, is the world changing? So is the input changing? Uh, is the insights on that input changing? So if you built subsequent models, is the process drift changing? Are the ideas that would be generated by the data changing? And then is the output changing? Is the feedback loop changing? So if you have that understanding, then you can say, the world's shifting. Is it shifting in a way that makes my opinion, which is my model, inaccurate? If you think
Hmm.
about models as expert opinions developed by scientists, data scientists, about a topic, and then say that opinion can get old, just like anybody's opinion can become stale, become inaccurate. The world keeps on changing. And then you can actually monitor that and say, okay, it's starting to change. Let's do something about it. Let's get to a fresher opinion. That's absolutely critical to maintain the value statement of that system. So if you said, hey, is it going to rain today? And I used all this advanced analysis to be able to predict weather patterns and everything else. And a couple of years from now, El Nino happens or some other weather pattern change happens. And now all of a sudden I'm not predictive in my capability. If you kept on using my opinion before El Nino happened, I'd be wrong a lot. And then it wouldn't be helpful. And so you do have to shift as the environment shifts and update your opinion to refresh it. And MLOps is about that refreshing and that monitoring and that maintenance. So it's absolutely as critical as the original development and insight generation.
Well, I definitely appreciate you walking through with those examples, and hopefully everyone has a little bit better appreciation of how these buzzwords are a little bit different. And we've talked a lot about some of the things that are going on behind the scenes, and making sure that we start thinking about everything from the data to the business to the ecosystem to the prompt fluency. Maybe I'll start talking about that on in some of my
That's a
blog
good
posts
term.
as well too.
Yeah, that's good.
But I want to switch over to Q&A, noting that we have 11 minutes left. So thank you to the folks that have been putting some questions in the chat here. So Ben, as I'm looking through, these range from some of the topics we've talked about to careers in the space, and given your role as a VP and chief data scientist at Multiplan, hopefully you can put that hat on for a second too.
Sure.
So Tracy was asking, as someone who is looking to make a career change and is working through a master's in data analytics, what kind of things would you want to see on a resume that could help that individual land at least an interview, noting that they're coming from a career change?
Good question. Um, uh, if you don't have experience in analytics historically from a professional perspective, uh, that doesn't mean that you can't have an analytics experience from a personal perspective. One of the questions I ask every data scientist I hire is, tell me about a time that you used analytics in your personal life, not work, right? Because it's such a general tool that if you never use it in your personal life, you don't understand that's just about trying to do a little bit better or trying to understand the world so you can make better decisions or whatnot, then you might be missing it, right? You might be missing the point of the technology, the point of the research, the point of the field of practice. Um, you know, I have two small children, so learning is key, right? What is it they like to eat? Why is it that they won't sleep? Does rocking them on one side or the other side matter? How do you know that somebody's actually asleep? What does that cry mean? Collecting all the data on that and then starting to build out results predictive results hopefully improves your sleep at night
Mhm.
or improves their health. And so taking that scientific mindset matters. And so if you have particular topics that you're a hobbyist on, if you apply some of the techniques you learn in school to those, you can put a little section at the bottom. I always like it when they have a little section which is like side projects or special activities or something like that, and you can put in, hey, I built a predictive analysis on what restaurant I should go to on this particular night because of how I've acted in the past, or I've ranked the top restaurants by keeping a little tracking mechanism of different taste compared to my spouse. So if I'm in the doghouse, we go to the spouses list and find something that ranks towards there. It's a date night, we try to find something in the center, or whatever it is, right? But showing that you want to try to frame out your experience in a comprehensive way. Personally, for me, when I was in college, I played a lot of pool, and so my undergraduate graduate research project and my grad research project was on like different pool strategies and trying to understand people's shot patterns and progressions and behavior, and are they going to choke on a shot or not based on the pressure, or what's the best strategy to shoot or defend. It wasn't because I had to do that. I was just interested in the problem. I wanted to try to solve it better. So even if you don't have experience, make experience. Make experience about things you're passionate about. People love passion in interviews. If you can showcase that and showcase that you have passion about a topic and about analytics, probably means that you're going to apply that same level of passion to the problems that are part of that company.
If I wasn't already standing, I'd stand up and clap for that last part on the passion piece,
We,
and
we did have
especially.
music earlier that it would have been perfect.
Well, to your point, advanced analytics, data science, machine learning, all these different roles are really passions. Like it's their labors of love, and there's going to be late nights. There's going to be tough business problems to work through, and if you're really passionate and a hiring manager sees that, that really stands out. And maybe if I summarize a couple of the key things you hit there, Ben, too, personalizing your experience in your resume and your portfolio, being able to stand out so you're not cookie cutter to everyone else.
Yes.
I you would always recommend the candidates assume everybody going into a job interview has the same technical qualifications that you have. Based on that, why would they pick you? Right? And if you can make that personal connection and show an example, and choosing a restaurant on a Friday evening is a great one, Ben, that you picked. My wife and I always go back and forth, and we end up debating for 45 minutes before we actually pick what we want to do. It's like picking a movie to watch in the evening. If you can choose something that's personal, but yet relates, and it can start a conversation, you've increased your chances of getting that phone call tenfold. So I really appreciate that response there, Ben. Next question here. Love this one from Terrence. So how deep, and I love how Terrence puts deep here in quotations, into data analytics should executives go in order to ask relevant questions and trust the data sound that's being presented? So I'm assuming with that question, these are executives that are not chief data scientists, right? Maybe it's president of sales or someone who's in supply chain or VP of marketing. How deep should they be going to be able to kind of pass the sanity of the sniff test?
Uh, well, there's this thing called supply line responsibility that's starting to come out in AI. It's exactly this topic is the end users have some responsibility to make sure they understand the product that they're using, those limitations. But at the same point, the person that's provisioning that, either the developer or distributor that's using the AI, has a responsibility to teach and explain. And so, what does the end user really need to understand about your technology to make them confident as well as make them not irresponsible? Um, well, you need to know limitations in use, appropriateness of use, why it was built. You need to understand the underlying data that it was built upon, so you can understand this is the population that is being reviewed. This is all this machine knows. Um, and you need to understand or be able to explain what confidence would look like. So one of the big things that I think is starting to be a shift in the world is that beyond just having a point estimation, point prediction, you also need to have a level of confidence around it. And that way people can contextualize that. It's this, there's a 30% chance of rain plus or minus 20%, or there's the price that's going to be 50 grand plus or minus 10,000 or something like that. Having those confidence intervals for like even a 95% confidence interval gives so much more context that's helpful. So how deep do they need to go? They need to go to at least that level to understand how confident they can be in it, what its use is, and when they shouldn't use it. And shouldn't use it is kind of hard because it's such a broad thing. But if you understand the context of when you should use it, and then say if it's not this context, call me, ask questions. I still own this model. I'm still responsible for making sure it's used correctly. Um, Please call the number if it's not expressly in this bounds. Um, that helps to create a level of responsibility that's appropriate for that end user. Um, so there's a level of responsibility you take upon yourself to be continuously a part of the process. I don't know. Did
So
that answer the question?
yeah, I think so. And there was two things that were popping into my head as you were talking about that. One is, as a stakeholder of an advanced analytics team or product, keep in mind that you are a partner in that. Like, you are as important as the algorithm, if not more important. So you want to make sure you have that kind of a relationship with the data science team, the advanced analytics team. And the second is, and this is something I used to always encourage um, senior stakeholders and individual contributors that weren't necessarily technical, think about things in terms of scenarios. If A, B, and C was to happen, what does this look like? And you start getting into this world of simulation, and a lot of times the data science team can simulate those outcomes for you. And if not, they can choose an algorithm that can to be able to give you some kind of a baseline. But contextualize it. If something happens, if a certain thing takes place, what does this look like? Building on Ben's point, that is a great way to put it in terms that you can really get your hands around. Um, so I know we're getting really close to time here. There was one other question that is specific to WGU in our program, so I'm going to take that one, Ben, unless you're really well versed in our portfolio.
I am not as well versed as you.
So this question is coming from Sean, and it's around how does a career in software development get enhanced by a master's in data analytics degree? So this person's beginning to look more into data and telling a story. I'm also very interested in machine learning and would love to learn more about how I can utilize both software and the master's in data analytics strengths to build on each other, which I love. Diversifying your skill portfolio is awesome. And it really comes down to what role under the analytics umbrella you're really excited about. So if you have software development as a background, think about this from a UX perspective. You can go in and think about what that user experience is going to be and build a front end on top of it. You can build a website or an applet, maybe a mobile app. You can think about building a workflow technology. You can think about adding gamification potentially into it to get end users excited about the particular product. There's a lot of design principles that come from this software engineering space that'll be really beneficial when you start thinking about what is it, that thing that the analytics is going to exist within. Is it, because at the end of the day, we don't want to be sending these models out in Excel spreadsheets, and dashboard paralysis is a real thing. You get a dashboard, you get a dashboard, everyone gets a dashboard. If you can build an applet or some kind of other experience, if you're a data scientist, you maybe think R Shiny, to be able to package it in a way that somebody can consume in the business in a way that makes sense. That's where your software background is going to really come in handy on that deployment angle. So that actually brings us right to time. So hopefully folks have been getting some new ideas about some of these buzzwords that are floating around out there. So when somebody's talking about AI or ML or ML ops or Gen AI or large language models or ChatGPT, there's so much behind these things, as Ben was alluding to, from the data management, from the decision making process, to the data integrity, to prompt fluency, all these different components. And we're really excited, Ben, that we were able to talk with you about that today. You're able to share these insights, share examples. Any final words out to the audience before we wrap up?
I think that AI, just like anything else in science, it's all about continuous learning. right? And everybody here is a student. That doesn't end at the day that you get a diploma. So stay hungry for knowledge, stay hungry for learning. This is an immensely fast-paced field and expanding field. Nobody knows everything about data science. Nobody knows everything about AI, even if you spend 80 years trying to learn it. So constantly be trying to learn and reading and studying and trying out new techniques because it really does pay dividends. Everything is another tool in your tool belt, and then you become a great craftsman from it.
Awesome. Ben, thank you very much. Everyone, we were joined with Dr. Ben Perryman, who is the Chief Data Scientist and VP of Data Services at Multiplan. You've been watching episode 13, Beyond the Buzzwords of the Dean's Fireside Chat series here at WGU in the College of IT. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode that'll be coming in a couple of months. Until then, have a great evening. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, everyone.